Hey guys, this is John. I'm playing capa49 in a 5+5 game on chess.com. Pretty fast time control again, just like I played against Jalapeno 7 the other week. Let's play a Sicilian defense. So, my opponent is rated 1710. I'll play d6 on move 2. Debating what open Sicilian I want to play. I have most experience with classical, so I'm going to go with that. Okay, bishop e2, indicating that white wants to castle kingside. I like to play e5. You can also play e6 in this structure, perfectly fine. e5 does give away control of the d5 square, so you have to be aware of that. But bishop e7, get ready to castle. Now with the knight position on b3, it's actually fairly likely I'm going to play a5, a4, and either try to kick the knight out of the b3 square or induce white to play a4 himself to stop me, but that will give me the b4 square. So I can play it right away if I want. I think I'm going to do that. Yeah, I think this is good timing right here, because if white plays knight a4, trying to stop a4, then they would lose this pawn. So, and now I think I'm going to play bishop to e6, but look for me to jump my knight into this square. Good Sicilian idea. But, you know, it doesn't come without a penalty. I do slightly weaken my b5 square. Actually, definitely weaken my b5 square because I can no longer play a6 and have the pawn guard that square. But it's been demonstrated to be a pretty good trade-off. We'll see how white reacts here. So knight b4, rook c8, possible idea of d5 down the road. I picked up how to play these positions and looking at a bunch of games by this Croatian grandmaster who I've mentioned on my channel a few times, Zdenko Kozul. He has this variation in the Sicilian named after him with the interesting name, the Kozul suicide variation, because he keeps his king in the center, often weathering a bunch of storms around that king that white can throw at you. That's in a completely different line. It's in the Richter Rouser, which is white playing bishop g5 on move 6. Okay, bishop f3. So it looks to me like white is overprotecting the e4 pawn and also perhaps trying to stop me from playing d5. But generally, that's not a great square for the bishop, kind of blocked in by these two pawns. It's kind of a big pawn right there. And I'm thinking about playing knight b4 all the same. I don't really see why I should deviate from that course of action. I could play rook c8 as well. But I like knight into b4. So already creates some annoying tension for white to deal with. You know, the a2 pawn being potentially weak. If white plays knight b5, I'll consider playing d5. Even without white playing knight b5, I may look to make this push. White could put their knight in on d5, but I don't feel like I'm going to be opposed to trading it, and white does play that. Now, which way should I take? Leaning towards taking this way in order to keep my knight on b4. So knight f takes d4, knight f takes d5, I should say, e takes d5, and then bishop f5. Yeah, definitely like the look of that, because if white were to play c3 at that point, I'll have options like bishop c2, or even knight c2. c3, knight c2, hitting the rook and also hitting the bishop on e3. Bishop c2 at first sight looks good, attacking the queen and also the knight, but queen d2, I take on b3, white takes on b4. I probably don't have an advantage there. So, okay, so rook c1, defending c2, but now a4 is a little bit vulnerable. Maybe I can play queen d7 and jump on that new weakness. That looks tempting. Also, rook c8 seems like a pretty strong move. Attack this pawn, because knight d3 would be a very nice move to land. Okay, yeah, here I have some good options to consider. I think both of those moves I just mentioned look good. So rook c8 or queen d7, my two primary candidates. Yeah, I think both are strong. I'm kind of leaning towards queen d7 just because it would be nice to pick this pawn up. If rook c8, c3, knight d3, maybe white can play rook b1 and hold the position together, and my rook may not be that useful. So let's go ahead and play this one. And of course, if white goes back to a1 to defend the a4 pawn, then I can take on c2. This time I'll take with the bishop for sure. So already a very unenviable situation for white. I think they kind of have to play c3 here, but that does invite my knight to jump into this d3 square with tempo on the rook and hit the b pawn, and with this on the way. And now I'm glad that I kept my rook on a8 for a little while, because my pawn on a5 is not hanging when I've moved my queen. Doing okay time-wise. I did spend a minute on this last move, but deciding between two good moves, and I kind of felt like I had an advantage. Five is not a bad blitz time control, by the way. You know, I think the 5-second increment does give you some chance to play a halfway decent game. There's still going to be a lot of blunders, as you saw last time when I played Jalapeno 7. I think that was a 5-5 game as well. You know, even for a pretty good player, it's tough to keep it together. Yeah, c3. Okay, so knight d3. I could also play knight a2, but that doesn't look quite right. White will play rook a1. I might take a4, but I don't like my knight position there. This is a much more aggressive and natural square to go to. Yeah, double attack. And white, if you're white, you hate to put the rook on c2 or b1 because it's right in the line of fire with this bishop, but kind of have to because I think losing b2 would be pretty bad. Although in fairness, white may consider rook a1 to defend this, and after takes, move their queen, although then I think at minimum I can pick up the a4 pawn too. So yeah, that is what white's going to do. Just scanning to see if there's any tactical problems with going after b2 followed by a4. I don't think so. My knight looks pretty stable there, so let's do it. I can always play b5 if I need to after taking here. So tempo on white's queen. If white plays queen e2, it would be nice to play bishop d3 and skewer the queen to the rook, but that will hang my knight on b2. Yeah, and you can just see white's bishop is kind of misplaced. Putting that bishop on f3, especially with the pawn back on f2, you don't really have much pressure on the black center. I think it's already tough. So queen c1. Okay, so again, I can take here. I could pivot my knight out via one of these squares if I really needed to, but taking on a4, picking up a pawn looks pretty darn good. Again, just scanning to see if there's anything white can do that's really going to hurt me there, but I don't think so, so let's do it. Maybe I can bring this rook over to c8 and attack the pawn on c3 a couple times. And if queen a3, either b5 or maybe just knight takes c3, maybe even better. White could take a5, but it looks very shaky for him. Okay, c4. Looking at rook f8, pinning the pawn on c4 to the white queen. If that queen moves to a3, I can play rook takes c4. b6 is another stabilizing move I could play here just to give my knight access to the c5 square, but definitely liking this. I see there's also bishop d3 if I ever want it to attack this rook. Probably don't want to play e4 here because that's going to give away the d4 square. It's like a temporary attack on the bishop, but not much else. So looking like rook f8 is strong. Do I have to worry about white playing c5 pawn sacrifice? That may be a redeeming feature of this move, but I think c5 is going to be unsound. Yeah, let's go ahead and play this. I think if I were white, though, I would consider playing c5 just to try to further unbalance the position. I mean, white's already down 2 pawns If they play normally, they're probably going to lose normally. So in such a situation, you should consider more aggressive moves, even if it means giving away another pawn. So I think that wouldn't be a bad practical decision. So I'm thinking about what I'm going to do if white plays that. I'd probably take with the pawn. I really actually like my knight on a4. Stops white from hitting a5. Okay, white goes back. So that stops bishop d3. Overprotects this, but doesn't do anything to address b5. Maybe white will play queen a3 then, but then I have knight c3 at minimum. That's looking strong. Yeah, b5 looks good. Let's play it fast. White's already drifting into pretty bad time pressure here, so keep our foot on the gas. White can play knight d2 to further support. Okay, queen a3. Yeah, and I was thinking about just playing knight c3 here, hitting the bishop, and also getting ready to take on c4. Definitely like the look of that. Let's do it. Might even chase this bishop a little bit further. So if bishop f3, I could think about e4 now because it's kind of lacking some squares. Okay, rook e1. Taking that bishop looks pretty wise. Could also try to roll my pawns. b4 followed by a4. Ooh, that looks tempting too. I'm pretty spoiled for choice in this position. Not going to lie, guys. So b4, but in such situations, like, you got to be careful not to fall in love with your position. Ultimately, you gotta play something good. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna take the bishop and then play rook takes c4. Get the two bishops. I think knight takes a5 should run into rook a4 with pretty big issues. I was thinking rook a4, queen c3, b4. I don't think white can hold that knight in the long run. It looks too tough to do that. Anything else move order-wise I should consider here? No, I think this is pretty natural. If queen c1, I can just play rook takes a5. Actually, okay, on this I can just play rook takes a5 too. I don't even need to kick the queen away. Yeah, because rook takes a5, white can play queen takes a5. But then after we get a trade here, I will have won a queen and a knight for two rooks. So, okay, so do I go for that, or do I continue trying to attack their queen? And I mean, b4 might actually be more clear-cut now that I think about it, because b4 here, take, I just win that outright. I don't have to give up the two rooks for it. Queen c6 I can take, that's no big deal. So yeah, let's do this. I've got a lot of my pieces protected and overprotected. The rook on a8 is loose, so I had to make sure queen c6 I can take it here. But yeah, I think this is going to be curtains for white. Yeah, my opponent lost on time, but it does look straight up lost here. So for example, queen c1, take a5. Okay, so I got the chess.com seal of approval. One player dominated the entire game. So the way in which white played the opening looks pretty normal. Bishop e2 and castles, and in principle there should be nothing wrong with it. But I guess if I were to question one move, it would be this bishop f3 move. You know, again, maybe white was trying to overprotect e4 or try to stop me from playing d5, but I think that makes it pretty tough for white to generate play. And I do believe against this line of the Sicilian, white should try to castle queenside. So let's click over to the analysis board for a second. And we'll step through the game. So Sicilian defense. If you're tackling a new major opening and you're not sure what sub-variation to study, you can't go wrong with going for the classical variation. There's lots of classical variations in major openings. If it's called classical, it's probably, you know, a pretty decent bet. It's been played by many strong players over the years. So this is the classical Sicilian, black playing knight c6. It's not considered to be as strong as the Najdorf, which is a6 here, but I actually find this a little easier to play myself. It's a developing move. Sometimes the knight can be better placed on d7 in the Sicilian, but it's hard to argue with this. Players like Vladimir Kramnik played this a lot in the 1990s. I mentioned Kozhel is one modern player who plays this quite a bit as black. It was his main weapon for many years. He still plays it. This particular variation is the Boleslavsky variation. So white playing bishop e2 and black playing e5. And then black playing bishop e7. Theoretically, this bishop g5 variation, the Richter-Rauser, is considered the most challenging, with the plan of going queen d2 and castling on the queen side. And very often in the Sicilian, the theoretically strongest lines are to castle queen side for white and try to play dynamically either in the center or on the king side, because if you're castle queen side, it makes you easier for you to pawn storm on the king side, for one thing. So after bishop g5, a lot of the games go like e6, queen d2, and black can play bishop e7 and castle short, or they can play a6, bishop d7, which is one thing I do. This Kozel suicide variation is like this. Black playing b5, and then a trade on f6. Black gets this pawn structure like this, and the play becomes very interesting because black's king tries to stay hidden behind this pawn structure oftentimes. Black has the two bishops, but white has more space in the center, and the games can get really sharp. So bishop g5. You might be wondering about bishop e3. Like bishop e3 is occasionally played as well. It does invite black to play knight g4 and attack the bishop, or even e5 again. White can also play f3 if they want to try to play bishop e3. This is another approach entirely. I tend to think these approaches are a little bit better if white wants to go for something other than bishop g5. Whereas bishop e2 I think is kind of a toothless variation in my opinion. So I played e5. And again, black could play it with e6, keep these pawns side by side. A little bit more restrained. You don't give up control of the d5 square, but you don't have as much influence on the center too. So this is how Kozel usually plays it with e5. White plays knight b3. And you don't want to trade on c6 without good reason if you're white in the open Sicilian, because that just allows black to take towards the center, better control the d5 square. So it's wise for white to back off. Knight f3 is another alternative here. And then stepping forward here, bishop e7, castle, castle. Now because d5 is weak, in theory, it would be nice for white to eventually play knight d5. But they can't do it right away because black can take the pawn on e4. And you'd like to play knight d5 when black doesn't even have the option of taking it with their knight. So you may consider this to be an option, but I think black's generally okay if white takes on f6 voluntarily, like let's say even in a position like this, and then white plays knight d5. Because black's dark square bishop is unopposed, and black can generate counterplay here around the knight, or even seek to exchange it later, knight e7. There's some similarities to a Sveshnikov Sicilian here. So the way white played it, bishop e3 is pretty normal, and yeah, I think this a5 move is instructive for some of you Sicilian players out there. This happens in the Najdorf sometimes. It happens pretty frequently in the Classical Sicilian with the knight here. And yeah, you're trying to play a4 to kick this knight further away. And when white plays a4, yes, you weaken the b5 square, but b4 becomes a real nice outpost for your knight. So just as an example of some of the stuff white has to avoid here, let's just play a couple normal looking moves. So let's say white goes queen d2 and black plays knight b4. And let's say white plays f4. So looking to advance with their f-pawn, as white often should. Take, let's say bishop takes. So here already, there's some tactical issues, especially having to do with this diagonal and the weakness of these points. If you want to pause your video and figure out what black can do here, you can do so now. Okay, so black can play knight takes c2, queen takes c2, and then queen b6 check with a double attack on the knight on b3. That's a tactic I've seen Kozel use several times, something good to keep in mind, and kind of points to why this knight b4 move is uncomfortable for white, with white not having a convenient means of kicking this knight out now that white can't play a3. So you're kind of carving out an outpost square by playing this, by playing the a5 move, inducing a4, and then bringing your knight in. So often good to think about, if you have a knight that is yearning to move forward. And knights might not always want to move forward. They might want to stay where they're at, or in some cases even move backwards. But if you're thinking about like, oh, this square looks pretty enticing, but my opponent can kick it away with a pawn, figure out how you can manipulate the structure or carve out an outpost by, making your opponent's pawns move forward so that your knight is nice and snug there. Because that's the definition of a strong outpost square for a knight, if it can't be kicked away by enemy pawns. So bishop e6, white played bishop f3, and if I were to offer white advice, I mean, I think playing queen d2 is not bad to start. Queen d2 and, I was saying knight b4. They could go for this f4 variation I just demonstrated. Maybe take with a rook instead. I tend to think black's doing pretty well here. Like I said, black can play this advance if they want. I probably would have played something like rook c8, or you could even make an argument for not capturing this pawn and just playing like rook c8 here. Let white play f5 and then play bishop c4. Play this position. If there's a trade, there'll be some nice pressure here. Also note that black's queen guards the a5 square. So I have a slight bias for these positions for black. I just tend to like them. But that's probably what I would do. Or, maybe throw in king h1 at some point if you're white. So even here, like king h1, you'll often see white playing this just as kind of acknowledgement that this diagonal will be weak if white plays for f4. But still, it doesn't interfere with black's plans, either d5 or rook c8 with sustained pressure. But yeah, I just think after that bishop f3 move, it's already a little tricky to handle white's position. I was mentioning, white could try knight b5 here, perhaps. And then I was thinking maybe play d5 since there's one less defender on that square, so you could advance. It does kind of give up the c5 square. I feel like I was also considering something else in this position. Maybe bishop c4, trying to attack the rook and also eye this up. Maybe with ideas, like just this. Although white might try knight a7 here. Knight b5 is probably a bit more of a combative move, though. White could really resort to something drastic here and play knight a2 to try to trade that knight, but that kind of feels wrong to me. If ever there's a capture here, there's still some alignment problems for white. But yes, after knight d5, take bishop here, I think white's already in significant trouble. I might add the engine in here, but I was not seeing how white could hold the position together. Yeah, rook c1, queen d7. I guess, white could play this immediately, but I was really liking the look of knight c2. Maybe this is the better option, but let's take a peek at what the engine says. Yeah, the engine already thinks this is getting into +1 territory for black or close to it. Back up a couple moves. What about this position? It says this is even. Rook e1 or h3. Some evaluations peeking up there for black. What about knight b5? Knight b5 just wants me to play d5. Yeah, this break. So, okay, knight d5, and did I play this right? Oh yeah, it also points out bishop takes d5, and then e4. That's interesting. Yeah, just trying to play to win the d-pawn in the center. A little less natural to give away the bishop for the knight, but tactically I guess that does work. Bishop moves away, and you can take d5 either way, although not as big of a fan of my pawn structure here. I kind of like the way I played it. Yeah, and what if white plays c3? Let's investigate that line. Yep, knight c2. Because remember, bishop c2 looks good at first picking this up, but then white gets to take here, and I'm not sure this is even that bad for white. Engine thinks it's fine. So rook c1. Yeah, queen d7 looks pretty strong. Yeah, these are all nice evaluations for black. Not yet losing evaluations from white's point of view, but easy to slip into that territory if you play a couple inaccurate moves. It says white should play bishop e2 or queen d2 here. It's already looking at some very defensive plan like this. Take, and then bishop d1, probably to try to further reinforce the defense here. Yeah, that's a bad sign if you have to do that. Computer-like defense, too. Not many people are going to think of bringing the bishop back there. So I'm not surprised how much pressure white's under the way the game played out like this. But yeah, good example of attacking multiple weaknesses. We're not just focused on attacking c2. Also trying to attack a fresh weakness. So always asking yourself, what is my opponent trying to do with their last move? And were there any drawbacks to their last move? And rook c1, I think the clear drawback is that there's no defender on a4. So, and interestingly, it says queen e8 is a little stronger. Didn't even consider queen a8. Queen d7 just looked way more natural as a way to attack. I kind of wonder why it likes queen e8 a little bit more. What about rook c8? This is the other move I was debating. Yeah, the only reason I didn't go for this one is I thought the rook may not be that useful here. Rook b1, still uncomfortable, but nothing too devastating for me yet. So queen d7, yeah, c3, and I jumped in, and it's real difficult now. Yeah. Take b2. White could play this, but queen takes a4, pawn drops off. Yeah, white's still under pressure. Computer's suggesting this, trying to trade queens, but down a pawn. And I'll just quickly look at the remainder of the game here. I felt pretty good about it, but always potential things to learn. Yeah, this is already +3 in black's favor. b5. You know, I was mentioning maybe c5. I know the computer's not going to like this move, but this is the type of move I would consider if I were white, because, again, I said if you play normally, you're probably going to lose normally. So you want to get a little bit more aggressive. You want to ramp up the complications if you can in a bad position, because maybe your opponent will make a mistake. If you try to play too normally and just grit your teeth and defend, oftentimes, even though it sounds like the correct thing to do, once a position is this far gone, like you gotta try something pretty wild. You gotta try to land a haymaker. You know, you're trailing going into the 12th round, like in a boxing match. You know you're gonna lose on the scorecard. Got to look for that knockout. So just to try to, you know, get a pass pawn or somehow upset the balance. Not claiming this is at all good for white, but from a practical point of view, I'd consider it. So bishop e2, yeah, b5. Just not a whole lot to do here for white. Just a lot of alignment issues. Yeah, white took on a5 here, but it does seem to just run into this. Yep, and then b4 is fine. I was also thinking about this. Although white could get 2 rooks for the queen, I do have an extra minor piece with this. So queen and 2 bishops against 2 rooks and a bishop. Also have 2 extra pawns. So this would be winning too. But the other one seemed a little more clear. b4, and had the game continued, I was just going to play something like this. Okay, so thank you to capa49 for the game. Like I said, bishop f3 I think was probably the mistake. But pretty thematic Sicilian game, especially for you classical Sicilian players out there, which is a line of the Sicilian I would recommend if you're getting into the Sicilian for the first time. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll be back again shortly with another video. Bye, guys.